Oh my God, are you in for a treat with this episode? My guest is Laura Hall, best known as the piano player on the TV show Whose Line Is It Anyway? That's right, I am thrilled because as you may know, I have been performing improv comedy here in my hometown of St. Louis for decades. And in the last 2 or 3 years, I have been really immersing myself in teaching and performing it. And since I play the guitar, I've been adding more and more musical improv. So I've been aware of Laura and watching her on TV and on YouTube through all the different incarnations of the American version of Whose Line Is It Anyway for years. And so that's why I'm particularly thrilled about this one. In fact, it was so in-depth and she was so generous with her time. She has such a great attitude. I had like an hour's worth of the interview, and I'm actually going to be doing it in 2 parts. So this is part 1 of my interview with Laura Hall, and we talk about not only the Whose Line Is It Anyway show, but we talk about the role of music in improv and how to incorporate improv principles into your life and your career. There are a ton of lessons to be learned here. I'll start that interview in just a moment, but first I just wanted to let you know that this episode is being brought to you by The Empowered Artist, which just happens to be my latest book. It's a call to action for musicians, writers, visual artists, and anyone who wants to make a difference with their creativity. And you just go to empartist.com. Just take the first 3 letters of the word empowered, EMP, add it to artist.com, empartist.com. And now let's get to my interview with Laura Hall. You are listening to The Creative Entrepreneur, Season 2, Episode 11. So I am so thrilled. On the Skype phone with me right now is Laura Hall. Hello, Laura. How are you?
Hi, I'm great. How are you doing?
I'm doing fantastic, and this is a real thrill for me because this is actually not our first meeting because we met almost a year ago when you and Rick, your husband, were coming through St. Louis, and you did a musical improv workshop that I attended, and we had a chance to meet then and actually perform that same night, right?
Yes. We do a lot of workshops like all over the country. We travel a lot and do them, and it's really fun because it's such a great way to meet other improvisers and see what they're doing and just sort of get a feel for it. There's like every improv scene sort of has its own feel, in different cities.
Right, yeah, and there's a growing one here in St. Louis. I'm sure I've mentioned on previous episodes of the podcast, or maybe people that listen already know that that's one of the many creative things that I do, teach and perform improv. And not everybody that does improv is into the musical aspect, because it's like another level, advanced level of challenge that intimidates a lot of people, right? But I'm having a blast doing it. So this is really a thrill for me to actually be able to interview you and find out more about you. I guess it's safe to say that a lot of people know of you from your association and your work on Whose Line Is It Anyway? However, I know that there's a lot more to your life and your career than that shows. So yeah, I'd like to find out more, because I know you play in a band called the Sweet Potatoes. You have albums of original music out. You've got the karaoke, improv. There's a whole array of things that we're going to squeeze in here and find out what makes you tick in your particular approach to a successful career in the arts. But why don't we start with just your background, what led you to what you're doing now? I'm really curious about that journey, if you wouldn't mind sharing.
Well, I grew up in Chicago and I started out there. I went to school there, and I really started out sort of doing a little bit of everything. I was playing in bands. I was in a wedding band. I was in original bands. I accompanied dance classes. I did everything. I did piano bar. I did theater. I did everything I could. And because for me, it was all interesting, and I felt like it was all sort of building my musicianship. Mm-hmm. And then as I was finishing college, I got hired at Second City as a musician. I'd actually been working there as a waitress first.
Well, that's interesting, because So I don't think I realized you were originally from Chicago, and that's the home of the Second City. Right?
Yes.
So that's funny. So you started, you always hear about these people that started in the mailroom and worked their way up, or whatever.
Actually, I was even a coat check girl before I was a waitress. That's how and then I took a big cut in pay and became a musician, because the waitresses made way more money.
That is so sad. I just stayed with
But yeah. Yeah, it says a lot. But I mean, I knew improv from growing up in Chicago, and I knew Second City. I'd been there many times, but I wasn't specifically wanting to be an improv musician. I just wanted to be a musician. But when I got hired, I was like, great, yes, And it turned out to be such a great experience for me, not because I really got stage time and I really learned about being a performer and being part of a performance team.
I know I've seen pictures of you on your website playing the guitar. Is the guitar and the piano or keyboard your primary instruments?
Piano is my first instrument, for sure. So, and with Second City and On Whose Line, I play piano.
Right.
I've been playing guitar. I started later because I wanted to be having more mediums for writing.
Right, and so I know that that playing the piano with an improv troupe is the typical instrument, because I play the guitar with mine, which is a little different but still works. It's just another way of accompanying. But not every musician. I mean, it's actually a rare musician that's able to work with an improv troupe. You have to be very versatile, very in the moment, and be able to, just like the improvisers who were acting, you have to be able to jump right in with the musical accompaniment, right?
Yeah, and you have to be really flexible. There are far better musicians than me who aren't necessarily good at doing this kind of improv because of the way that you do have to be flexible, and you have to, it's sort of a half and half of that. You're leading and being led at the same time, right? Yeah, you can't just sort of go full steam ahead because you're always listening and connecting with what the actors are doing.
And I'm sure that you're when you perform live, like I know looking at your website that you've gone on tour, with the Whose Line cast and also with Second City. You have a lot more that you do in those shows because on Whose Line you just accompany on certain musical bits.
Right.
But am I correct? Like in the Second City type of things, you're there in the middle of a scene, somebody says something and you've got a sound effect for it, you just jump right in, you add things to different scenes, right?
Right. You there's definitely more playing. You also play between things as a way to sort of keep the ball in the air and keep the energy moving and all of that. So there's that, but then you also, there's underscoring. And I love underscoring. Like I love doing long form stuff like Make a Musical, because you get to underscore and connect the scenes, and then you're functioning in another way. So there's a lot of different ways the music can function within improv, Yes, and Whose Line, it's very limited in a lot of ways.
Right. I guess the way you're describing that, it's almost like a film score. Like the music enhances this whatever scene, whatever's going on, and you got to do that in the moment.
Yes, but that's definitely part of the fun, because you're reading the rhythm and the vibe of the scene as it goes.
That's awesome.
Just this last summer, we did Whose Line live in London, and that was a live stage show, not recorded for television, but in a big theater in London. And Linda Taylor and I both went, and we got to do all that stuff. We got to do underscoring and between stuff, and so it's a little more of a full. And we even got to play beforehand and at the intermission, at the interval, as they say.
Oh, cool!
And we got to jam. So so you get to just play more.
Oh yeah, I bet you that was fun for you.
Yeah,
awesome.
Yeah.
So you're working. So you become the accompanist or the at Second City, and then where do things go from there in your career path?
Yes. So I was doing that. I was also doing stuff at The Annoyance, like writing original musicals and doing, The Annoyance would do these half improvised, half scripted musicals was one of the things we were doing, and also playing in bands and doing all that. And then we moved to LA because my husband, Rick, is an actor, and he got a series. So we thought, let's go for a year. That was 24 years ago.
Go for a year.
We'll go for a year and see what happens. And when we moved to LA, I was like, I'm going to quit focusing on improv as much and really focus more on my songwriting and movie scoring and some of those other opportunities, which I did, so I took some classes in scoring and that kind of stuff. And then a few years later, I got a call to audition for Whose Line, and I was like, yay, I'm doing improv again.
Cool. Now, was it somebody, I guess it was somebody who already knew of your work through Second City, was familiar with you, recommended you for
Exactly.
the
And
show.
my friend Ron West, who I toured with at Second City, and then he was on the British shows, some of the British shows, and then he was hired as a producer on the American shows, and they asked him to help find musicians.
Oh, cool.
So, yeah.
Was the original American show, and I don't even remember what year that started, but was it originally Drew Carey was the right off the bat for the American show, and were you part of that first incarnation in the U.S.?
It's interesting. So I was part of that first incarnation, but it was the first batch. We did 6 with the British host, Clive Anderson, and then the American cast. Although they'd all done the British show before, like Ryan had done. I guess Wayne had never done the British show, but the others had. So we used the British host, and we did this hybrid and shot it in the States. And then they did this test marketing to see how it went, and it got really good response. And then they had Drew become the host after that.
Cool. Do you remember what year that was?
That would be 97.
Oh, 97,
or
okay.
98, 97 or 98, somewhere in there. Of course, we had a long stretch so we did like 6 years, and then we had like 8 years where we didn't do them, and now we've been back for 3 years. When do you ever get a gig like that?
I know.
You know what I mean?
That's pretty.
It's like working on The Simpsons or something. You know?
It is, yeah. It's like it's like a house gig or whatever, but only on a much bigger stage. And actually, that's kind of a question that I had here. I didn't know when I was going to throw it in, but this seems like a good point. So, like a lot of creative people, no matter what their field is, they would go, "Oh boy, only if I had some kind of a high profile platform, then I'd be set." I've got all these benefits that would come. And I'm curious, as someone who has, years of exposure on national, I'm sure international markets, Whose Line is all over YouTube too, and even though maybe you don't have the marquee status of like Ryan and Colin, like the main players or whatever, but you're there every time. And Drew and Aisha Taylor, is that her name? Tyler?
Aisha Tyler.
Yes, is the new host. They always give you great props on the show. There's Laura Hall on the piano. And so I was well aware of your name for years. So what kind of benefit, are there pros that come with that kind of exposure over years, or do you think people maybe overestimate the benefits that come with that,
Well, there's definite benefits. I mean, in terms of, in the world of improv, having name recognition, you know what I mean? Like, I'm probably in the U.S. the best known improv musician in the U.S. You know what I mean? Yeah. So there are pluses with that. And like when we teach workshops and stuff, it certainly has been easier for us to get into that world of teaching and, doing the workshops and stuff because of that name recognition, definitely. But the other side of it is you still have to have the goods when you get there. You know what I mean? You still have to know how to teach. You still have to know how to do stuff. In other worlds, it's interesting because in the world of improv, I'm super well known. In other worlds, I'm not necessarily. And so my name may sometimes help me get a foot in the door, but you're still kind of proving yourself again in every format. So if I'm up to do, like right now, I'm up to write some songs for a movie, for a medium budget movie. I'm in the running if the movie goes. Of course, they're still getting the funding and all that stuff. But the name recognition helps a little. But really, they want to hear what I've done in that world. They want me to send them a film that I've scored so they know that I can do this. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So even if it's a little foot in the door, you're still proving yourself every time. That's interesting.
I guess it is very niche. And do you ever feel pigeonholed? Like I know you have your own original music that's separate from the show. Do you ever feel like, I want to be known for this? I mean, some artists are just grateful that they've got the exposure, and some people get frustrated at I didn't ever want to be known as this only, and I'm just wondering if you ever wrestled with that too.
Well, a little bit, although I don't feel like people go, oh, that's the only thing she can do. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like it may not be that Whose Line makes me be able to like get a bunch of exposure from my CDs with my bands. But I don't feel like people go, oh, that's all she does. Right. And I don't want to hear anything else. And in fact, I like when people go, oh, look, you've got all this other stuff too. I love that. And I feel like in general, people are really open and accepting of that. So I don't feel squashed in.
Well, good. That's a great attitude to have. And so speaking of those other things that you do, just go ahead and list like some of your like primary things that you do, like the sweet potatoes, and you've scored, movies and did a little acting yourself.
Yes, a little bit.
So what are some of those high, those things that you're proud of that you do, that you've done in recent years that people should be aware of?
Well, definitely the sweet potatoes is the sort of my baby. That's what I feel like is my sort of most personal art that I do in terms of the writing and the not necessarily satisfying anything outside of our own creative parameters. Do you know what I mean?
Sure.
And that's, in a way, the thing I'm most proud of, I would say.
And who's in that band, and what style? How would you characterize the style?
It's Americana. It's all acoustic instruments. I grew up like, I love Emmylou Harris and Patty Griffin, Dolly Parton, So it's along the lines of that. Old Crow Medicine Show is another favorite band of mine. It's along those lines, acoustic, that kind of old school. I hate to use the word country because then people think of pop country, but Americana is the word that sort of covers that style. And the band is myself and my husband, Rick, who taught the workshop that you took. He also plays bass and harmonica. Awesome. And then our friend Kelly McLeod, who plays guitar, and she writes as well. So both of us write. We all three sing. Lots of harmonies. I love singing harmonies. That's my, just rocks my world. And I play guitar, ukulele, and accordion in that band.
Oh, how cool.
So I hardly ever play piano, which is kind of fun because I write and play differently when I play those other instruments. That's partly why I wanted to learn to play guitar in the first place, was I wanted to have a wider range of writing. And sometimes it's easy to fall into a rut with writing, And so having this wider range has helped make my writing feel like it continues to have breath and life in it.
That's awesome.
Yeah, so that's my baby, is the band. The other thing that I do a lot of is the workshops, like we talked about. And that kind of started because that started from the Improv karaoke CDs that I made. And how that started was people would email me all the time saying, can you send me the tracks for a hoedown? Mm-hmm. And I could, and I can't because they're the property of the show, that specific music. And my friend said, well, why don't you do something kind of like it and send the tracks? And I'm like, oh, duh, of course I could. You know what I mean? So then I started making these tracks, and then I was having lots of fun doing lots of different styles. So we did 80s and disco and hard rock and all these different styles. And they're karaoke style tracks designed for people to improvise to. So then we did like an improv karaoke night where we had a bunch of our friends come and improvise, and we were like, this is really fun. And then we also made like an instructional CD that goes with it. So it kept just sort of building up, all from this one idea of, why don't you make a few tracks for people? And then we were like, well, we've done this instructional CD. We should be teaching, because we really like teaching. And so that was sort of how the workshops grew. So all of it kind of grew organically out of that one idea. So we do the workshops all over the country and in Canada, and we've been everywhere. And that's a lot of fun. And that's Rick and I also, my husband and I. We work together a lot.
That's awesome. Yeah. I'm running into more and more couples that travel together. My girlfriend Pooki and I know you didn't meet her when you were in town, but we've done a little of that ourselves. And that's probably a topic for a whole nother episode. How to get along with your spouse on the road.
Yeah.
But that's really smart of you to add products. I mean, I think this is a good lesson for anyone in a creative field. But what can you create other than, because your live performances, you have to be present. The karaoke CDs and the instruction things are more passive forms of income or extra, ways of serving people and giving them value, but also being able to add to your streams.
Right. And it's also great, like, people are able to, if they want to learn, like your group that does songprov in their shows, but if they don't always have a musician at rehearsal or when they work out, they'll use the tracks to work out with. Or we actually know several people who use them for performance because they just don't have a live musician in,
Right.
in Bakersfield or whatever, like they just can't find it. We're a scarce breed, improv musicians.
Yeah.
I have to say, it's a lot of people. That's the biggest thing I hear from improv groups is like, oh, I wish we had a musician.
Which is why I found, I guess, even in my little market, well, it's not even a little market, of St. Louis, it's a pretty significant city here, and there's a thriving or a growing improv scene here, but I do stand out, and people are attracted to me, and I guess because, or want to play with me because I have the ability to not only play the guitar well, but to improvise, and I've discovered that. It is a rarity.
Yeah.
And so I'm happy to be part of that.
Right, and then... group. It's so great because you understand improv. You know improv. You know what I mean? So you're not just a good musician. You're a musician who understands improv. And that, I think, is why it's so hard to find someone, is to find someone who sort of gets both elements of that.
So this is a great overview. All right, Laura, I'm going to ask you a question I like to ask a lot of my guests. Like I always like to look inside the mind of people that I admire who are successful in their fields and find out, what they consider to be the important keys to their success. So if I were to ask you if there was certain beliefs or actions or key moments or whatever, and you can narrow it down to like 3 key things that are responsible for what you do in the world today, what would those be? Let's start with number 1.
I would say the first one is this improv idea of yes and, which is the idea of being open to what comes your way. I would say pretty much my entire career has kind of been a big surprise to me. You know what I mean? Like, had you asked me when I was 20 where I thought my career was going to go, I never could have guessed in a million years, And a lot of the things that came to me, like starting to work at Second City was a great example. It wasn't in my plan. It wasn't in my, what's your 5-year plan? But it came to me and I said yes. And I, at that point, decided to really try and figure out what made it tick. You know what I mean? Like really put some energy into figuring out what made it tick. How does this work? Which I think has been sort of a connecting driving force through all my creative life is that curiosity about what makes something, anything work, what makes a movie work, what makes a musical work, And
the it that you're referring to is improv when you were made that offer, what makes it tick? Is that what you
Yes. What makes improv work? What makes the music relative to improv work? Mm-hmm. What makes the live show and the audience experience? Whole thing around improv.
Yeah.
And then what has to happen internally to do it?
I love that.
Right? Which is the being open, being willing to take the risk, being willing to fall on your face. That's part of the yes and. That's part of the excitement and scariness of improv. Right. It's partly why the audience is there too, right? It's because there's the potential.
And don't you find audiences are very sympathetic? So whether you're struggling or whether you're on it and being super witty, but a lot of people are afraid, well, what if I screw up? Well, actually, that's kind of entertaining for the audience too.
Right. And embracing it is part of embracing the fact that you can and will screw up is part of how you become a better improviser, I feel like.
Yeah. And I've often said that there are a lot of life lessons and philosophical aspects to improv, like this whole, yes and. I mean, so many people resist things in their life, and if they were just to accept them and say, well, how can I work with this? There's another word in improv called you justify what's just been entered or what's just been said. What if you applied that to your life? Well, this weird thing happened that I wasn't expecting, and maybe I don't like it in the moment here, but how can I use this?
Right.
And so
yes.
It's a way to approach your career, your life, your relationships, all types of stuff. And I love what you said about, and I think that's another thing that, again, somebody doesn't have to be an improviser to embrace this, but you mentioned the word fear and excitement. And so a lot of people perceive fear and they go, oh God, I don't like that, so I'm going to resist it. Although if you can transmute it into excitement, which is what I love, the thrill of being on the edge and flying without a net in improv, other people are intimidated by it, but you can also apply that to other aspects of your life too,
yes.
Right?
Yes, exactly. And I would say other aspects of my musicianship too, like people who say, oh, I get stage fright playing my instrument in front of people, for example, or singing in front of people. Of course you do. You should.
Yeah. Congratulations, you're human.
Yes, exactly, exactly. So if you say, yes, I get stage fright, and what does that do? What do I turn it into? How do I, and that actually, in a way, you could say is part of what makes a performance really infused, really exciting, is because you're taking that, your fear and the uncertainty of performing on stage and turning that into excitement. So yeah, for me, I would say that principle of yes and, doing improv and sort of embracing that principle has helped me embrace a lot of the other things in my career that I've gone, well, there's a new step. It's a little scary. I'm going to give it a shot. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Be open to opportunities that come along. Yeah, like being
Yes.
asked, okay, I know you're serving tables right now. Could you take a pay cut and play the piano? Yes.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, exactly.
Cool. So I guess that was the number one key. What else is on your list there? I'm curious if you're ready to move on to the next one.
The next one I would say, and it's actually kind of related, is the be willing to reinvent yourself. And that has, as I've gone through my career, it changes as you change as an artist. It changes as you age. It changes as the markets change, right? When I started out as a musician, there were no electronic press kits. You sent your press kit out in the mail. You know what I mean? You sent demo tapes to people when you were, as a songwriter. We were still sending cassettes, for crying out loud. You know what I mean? So, there's all sorts of things that have changed, both in terms of marketing and social media and all that stuff, but also even the whole dynamic of how the business works. When I was coming up, there were record deals, and that was what everybody wanted, a record deal. Right. And now the whole ability, particularly for niche music, is completely different because of the internet. So you can either fight that and say, well, back in the good old days, or you can figure out how you can still be the artist who is you. And be true to the artist who is you, but in the context of sort of a new world and a new market.
Awesome. I'm so glad that you said that, because I hear so many musicians in particular will come to mind with this. They complain about, I used to be able to count on the 4 days a week gig or whatever, and there are a certain way of doing things, and they just want it to stay that way. But of course, things always change. And it's like every generation or every era had this, there used to be a time when sheet music was the predominant music industry, late 1800s or whatever. And this crazy thing called radio and, vinyl came along, or phonographs, and disrupted everything. But I think we pretty much accepted that shit.
Right.
And even though you have to acknowledge that there's a real pain from people that have counted on a certain thing for their living, and suddenly it's taken away. So I'm not denying that. However, you've got to be flexible and just complaining about it only, staying there is a sure way to live a rough life.
Yes, and you can get kind of fossilized. I can get started about how music is devalued now, and from Pandora to YouTube to, you can go down that path. But the reality is that's where we are now, and you can work to make it better. But it's a different world than when I started out, for sure.
Cool.
Yeah.
So the yes and principles, number one, embracing that, be willing to reinvent yourself and be flexible with changing times and yourself as you change.
Right.
That's awesome. I know there's probably a number 3 coming up here too.
Yes. So this has been a big one for me, and it sounds odd, but this is definitely a personal one, is the reality that just because you have to work hard at something doesn't mean you're not good at it. And I know that sounds weird, but
explain that a little bit, because I think I know what you mean, but I'd like to.
I think there was a part of me, particularly as when I was younger, that was like, when you go to hear a musician play, you're hearing their finished product, right? Right. And you don't know what all went into it, but you hear it and it sounds so fantastic. It's like seeing a ballerina. It looks so beautiful and so effortless. Mm-hmm. And the fact that I had to work hard to learn to play my instrument. I felt like, well, what's wrong with me when it looks so effortless in them?
Oh, yeah.
But the reality is that the ballerina, in order to look effortless, spent hours and hours dancing. And the musician, in order to look effortless, spent hours and hours learning their instrument. And I would even say in the world of improv, which, yes, is spontaneous, but they've spent hours and hours learning to be a better improviser.
Right.
And there was this part of me when I was younger that felt like it almost discounted what I was doing, that I worked hard to get there, that I should somehow magically just be a brilliant improviser do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like,
so you had the idea that, it comes naturally to them because look at them, it's flawless, and I have to work at this thing, and not realizing they had to go through the same process that you're going through.
Exactly. And I don't know why that took me a while. I think all of us as artists have whatever insecurities we have, whatever, I'm not good enough. I'm not as good as them, or whatever. And I don't know why it took me a while, but that was a big realization. And that when I let go of that I'm somehow supposed to be able to do it magically. was when I was able to let myself enjoy the process and recognize the process as necessary, but also enjoy the process and be in it more.
When you mention that, that's one thing that I have a feeling a lot of people probably sense from you when they watch you on Whose Line, or when I was even doing the workshop with you. You have a great smile. Have people mentioned that about you, or like you whenever like Laura Hall, you're always smiling and beaming behind the piano, and so it always looks like you're enjoying the hell out of yourself no matter what's going on. And was that a premeditated thing? Is that just something that comes naturally to your face? That's the same thing that I noticed.
Well, it's funny. Rick always says that's my, hey, I'm a musician with a gig smile.
I'm working.
Yay, I'm working. But it is, and I do get great joy out of what I do. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean? I do get great joy. I love teaching. I love doing Whose Line. I love performing. I love singing. Mm-hmm. And I guess I've given myself permission to show that, to let that be, because I feel like that's part of who I am as a performer. You know what I mean? Like, I don't have to be all cool and badass and not look like I'm having fun, because the reality is it's really fun for me.
Oh, yeah. And it shows. So is that an amazing interview or what? And that's just part one. I'll be back next week with the second part of my interview with Laura Hall. So if you're not already subscribed to the podcast in iTunes or in Stitcher or wherever you subscribe to podcasts, now would be a great time to do so you don't miss that second part of the interview. I've got links to do all of those things in the show notes, so please subscribe and just be ready. I believe it'll be next Wednesday. It's the date that I am releasing these podcasts every week, so stay tuned for that. There's more coming. Thanks for listening. I hope you were inspired. Now it's your job to take that inspiration and do something with it. Take some action, get some results, do more with your art, impact more people with the gifts that only you can bring to the world. Have an amazing day. I will talk to you again soon. This is Bob Baker saying so long for now.